We're on page 64, topic 13, and this concerns itself just problem number 1. We're going to do 3 problems here, part E, part G, and part J, and it says factor out the greatest common factor. So let's start with E. And what we do here, we look at, first of all, the highest number. The first part is we look at the highest number that'll go into 2, 6, and 14. That'll divide into each of these numbers and give us an integer solution. So the highest number that'll go into 2, 6, and 14 is the answer 2. So that's 2. Now we look at x, and we have x cubed, x squared, and x to the power 1. Here, x to the power 1 is the lowest power, so it's just x. And now we look at the y. Here you can see y to the power 1, y to the power 2, and y to the 3. Well, this is the lowest power. So we have the lowest x power and the lowest y power are both x to the 1 and y to the 1, so it's x to the 1 times y to the 1. Then when we combine that with the 2x, multiply these 3 together, the common factors are 2xy. So this now is the problem written over here. Now we ask ourselves, okay, 2xy times what gives us 2x cubed y? And the answer is x squared. When we factor that, the 2xy out of the 2x cubed y, we're left with x squared. X squared times 2xy gives us 2x cubed y. Now, out of this one here, minus 6x squared y, if we factor out the 2, we're left with 3. 3 times 2 gives us the minus 6 here. Minus 3 times plus 2 gives us the minus 6. And it must be xy here, because xy times xy gives us x squared, y squared. Now we say, okay, we're going to divide 2 into 14, and we're going to get 7. We're going to factor out xy, which essentially means we're going to divide this term by xy, and we're going to be left with y squared. So let's go over that again. We look at these 3 terms, and we ask ourselves, what's the highest number that goes into 2, 6, and 14 and gives us an integer solution? It is the number 2. Then when we've got these x terms, we look for the lowest one, which is x to the 1. For the y, we look for the lowest one, which is this one over here, which is implied y to the 1. So we have x to the 1 and y to the 1, and that gives us, combined with a 2, 2xy. Now we simply factor that out. And essentially what we do is we divide the 2x cubed y by the 2xy, and that'll give us x squared. That's one way to look at it. We divide the 6x squared y by the 2xy, and that gives us 3xy, and the minus here gives us a minus here. Similarly, we're going to, if we take plus 14xy cubed and we divide it by 2xy, we're going to get 7y squared. The key thing is, by the distributive rule, when I multiply this times this, I've got to get that. When I multiply this times minus 3xy right here, I've got to get this. And when I multiply 2xy by 7y squared, I've got to get this. So I always check my answer that way. Okay, so now we've got there's 4 terms, and we have to figure out the greatest common factor. How do we do that? We ask ourselves, okay, what's the highest integer that goes into 56, 21, 35, and 49? Now I know 7 goes into 56, 7 goes into 21, 7 goes into 35, and 7 goes into 49. So that's something, if you know your arithmetic, you should be able to see that. So 7 is the highest common number. So first of all, I start with the 7. I look for the number. Then I've got x to the 5th, x cubed, x squared, okay, and x to the 4th. So the lowest power of x is x squared right here. And now I look at the y. I've got y to the 4th, y to the 2, y to the 3, y to the 5th. Which is the lowest? Y squared. So it just happens that x squared is the lowest term in x, and y squared is the lowest term in y in these 4 terms. I multiply the 7 times the x squared, y squared, and I put it over here, and that gives me my common factor. Now, if I divide 56x to the 5th, y to the 4th by this 7x squared, y squared, I'm going to be left with 8x cubed, y squared. So 8 times 7 gives me the 56. X squared times x cubed gives me x to the 5th. Y squared times y squared gives me y to the 4th. If I divide here, the plus becomes the plus here. I divide the 21 by the 7, I get the 3. I divide x cubed y squared by x squared y squared, I'm going to be left with the x. I divide the 35 by the 7, and I get minus, and that's a mistake here. So let's just correct that. This should be the number 5. Sorry about that. So we'll just put a 5. And okay, so let's go over that again. 35 divided by 7 gives us minus 5y here. Minus 35 divided by 7 gives us minus 5. X squared y cubed divided by x squared y squared just gives us a y term here. And finally, minus 49 divided by 7 gives us minus 7. X4 y fifth divided by x squared y squared gives us x squared y cubed. Now let's use the distributive rule here. 7 times 8 gives me 56. X squared times x cubed gives me x to the 5th. Y squared times y squared gives me y to the 4th. That takes care of the first term. 7 times plus 3 gives me plus 21. X squared times x gives me x cubed. And the y squared just goes up here, so that's that. So minus 35 divided by 7 gives me minus 5. And now x squared y cubed divided by x squared y squared will just give me a y term right here. Finally, minus 49 divided by 7 will give me minus 7. And then x to the 4th, y to the 5th divided by x squared y squared gives me x squared y cubed. So we found the greatest common factor, and then we factored it out, and then we checked the answer with the distributive rule. Okay, number 1J. Here, there is no number that will divide into both 7 and 8. So there's no common integer factor for 7 and 8. Now, I take the lowest power of x. This is x squared. And this is x to the 1. So I'm just going to take x to the 1, or x. Now I have x plus 1 squared and x plus 1 squared. The lowest one is also the highest one, but I can factor out x plus 1 squared. So if I multiply x times x plus 1 squared, I get x times 1 squared. So now I take this first term, And what I'm going to do is factor out. Here I've got the problem. Going to factor out, I said the common factor was x times x plus 1 squared. So if I divide this into this, what happens is that I'm left with 7x. So 7x times all of this gives me this first term. Now I take 8x, x plus 1 squared, and divide it by x times x plus 1 squared, and I get the plus 8 term here. So if I take this, x times x plus 1 squared, and I multiply it by 7x, I get this term right here, this first term right over here. I get this one. And now if I multiply x times x plus 1 squared times plus 8, I get this one right over here. Because the 8 times the x plus 1 squared gives me 8x, x plus 1 squared. So these are three problems on how to use the greatest common factor. Before you do any problem, the first thing you should do when you're looking at each of the terms is to find out what are the common factors, as we've done in this problem. So this completes topic 13, page 64, and the examples.